possibly send him back. He knows too much. They might arrange for him to. So I think the downgrade Turkey a few days ago to junk status by Moody's. 2nd century was an oligarchic model, an empire model, masquerading in like a drag queen. Failed July 15th coup d'etat attempt. To understand it, I think you have to go back to the period around May of this year, began to make outreach toward a rapprochement or reconciliation with Russia, as well as Israel, but I think that's part of a different agenda. And when it became clear that the rapprochement from President Erdogan was serious, the coup machinery went into effect, because among other things that were being discussed was bringing the Gazprom Turk Stream or Turkish Stream project from the Black Sea up through Turkey to the border of Greece, putting that back on the table, which it now is very much back on the table. And that pivot of Turkey is a strategic state, as you know, in the entire region, or the entire Eurasian region, really. And if Turkey were to successfully pivot its foreign policy toward some kind of alliance with Russia, that would affect the Turkish stance in Syria, because Russia is, as you know, very, very much involved in trying to stabilize and bring an end to that war in Syria. It's a war fundamentally over natural gas pipelines. The Americans have their agenda to control the pipeline. The Qataris have their agenda to get Qatari gas going through Syria, through Turkey and onto the European Union. And Iran, Iraq, and Syria, with the Russian blessing, have their agenda for Iranian natural gas from the Persian Gulf. So fundamentally, this is a war about power, about energy. It seems that wherever there's large reserves of oil or gas, there follows war, and the Anglo-American oil companies are right behind. So the pivot toward Russia was taken as an alarm signal in Washington, and the neoconservatives and the people handling Fethullah Gulen for the last 3.5 decades or more decided, from all evidence, and that included Henry Barkey, one of Gulen's handlers, a very intimate handler from all evidence, and also it included Graham E. Fuller. Now, both Barkey and Fuller have been with the Central Intelligence Agency for more than 3 decades professionally. They're both nominally retired, but you don't retire from the CIA. You simply have another station. One is at Lehigh University, and the other is at RAND Corporation, and now formally retired, but still very active. And both of them were reported to be in Istanbul the night of the coup. Well, first of all, Gulen, in my view, does not exist as a strategist. He is simply a face with a nice white hair and a mustache, and his role is to look like a benign Sufi Muslim and smile and say nothing. The movement that has been created has the sophistication of the Jesuit order of the Catholic Church. It's highly sophisticated, targeting the education, the youth, the male youth at a time of adolescence, and manipulating, according to first-hand accounts of former Gulenist members or associates. And it's something akin to the Scientology movement that the CIA created after World War II in the United States, the church, so-called, of Scientology. So it has this nature. Gulen himself sits in Pennsylvania, he has since 1998. He got a special status visa as an extraordinary scholar over the objection of the United States Department of State, who claimed that Gulen has a 5th grade education, is no scholar, and has no standing to have such a special status. But the intervention of the CIA, the intervention specifically of Graham E. Fuller, Morton Abramovich, who's former ambassador to Turkey and also reported to be CIA, overrode the United States Department of State, and that is where Fethullah Gulen sits to this day.
Do you know how the first contact occurred between CIA and Gulen movement?
I suspect, although I have no proof, I suspect it went back to Gulen's pre-Gulenist period several decades ago, when he was in these Gladio NATO networks, right-wing networks inside Turkey that were overseen by the CIA and by Gladio, and part of building this deep state, as it's often called, this kind of hidden government behind the scenes. Could possibly send him back. He knows too much. And they might arrange for him to land in the ocean with lead shoes on or something like that to destroy the evidence, but they would not send him back. They would not extradite him.
But obviously he is unsuccessful.
Well,
what CIA do?
Let's look at the larger Gulen network, the Project Gulen, let's call it that. It goes all the way through the Turkic republics of Central Asia. It goes into Xinjiang province, the Uyghur regions of China. And there's something like 3,000 Chinese students who were recruited through the Gulen network to come to Turkey, supposedly to study higher education at Turkish universities, but in fact recruited, trained by various terror organizations sponsored by the CIA and special forces, and sent into Syria to make jihad, to make terror.
You mean China is also in...
No, China government not. It's a huge security problem for China, because what they are fearing, and I think one reason China recently has offered to come into Syria and train Syrian army and alternative forces, is to themselves be aware of how serious this threat is for the stability of China. Xinjiang in western China, next to Tibet, is the crossroads of all the oil and gas pipelines from Kazakhstan, from Russia, and it's absolutely strategic for China not to have this blown up by terrorism, as we've already had some incidents in the last 3 years. Well, I think that's what we're seeing now. The Moody's rating agency. I'm an economist by background, and I've I've written a book called The Gods of Money about Wall Street and how Wall Street has taken over the United States essentially over the last 3 decades. And one of the things that I've observed time and time again is the political role of the American credit rating agencies, especially Moody's and Standard & Poor's. And they will make a judgment. For example, they made one 2.5 years ago about Russia being a junk credit quality, downgrading it to junk. And the Russian state debt is one of the lowest in the world. It's something like 13% of GDP. The American public debt is 104% of GDP. So this is just a joke. Russia is not about to default. But that was a political action. It was part of the U.S. Treasury's Operation of Terrorism and Financial Warfare Unit. It's a special unit they've created. So I think the downgrade of Turkey a few days ago to junk status by Moody's is purely a political act. There's no financial basis to expect that Turkey is going to default on its loans.
Just before 1 week, they say there's no problem in Turkey.
Yeah.
But
this is the neoconservatives, the military industry around the Obama administration, Ashton Carter, the U.S. Treasury. It's a political warfare unit.
Also, yesterday or 1 day more ago, Fitch also says no problem in Turkey.
Yeah.
They say no problem, but...
But they downgrade and make it more difficult for you to roll over credits with international creditors. They think that's the Achilles heel of Turkey. I think it's not going to work, but they can do some nasty damage. And what is happening in Russia is very interesting, because since the sanctions forced by the U.S. onto the European Union against Russia, Russia has actually turned east and become closer economically with China, also politically, closer with the countries of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, with Iran, and now potentially with Turkey. And I think that begins to define the worst nightmare of Washington or the neoconservatives at all, or certainly of NATO, and that is that the nations of Eurasia, vibrant nations with growing population, with skill levels, with educated intellectuals and raw materials, that they will begin cooperating in a contiguous land area. And the basis of this is the project that Xi Jinping unveiled 3 years ago called the One Belt, One Road, or the New Economic Silk Road. And Turkey has been involved in some of those negotiations. But I think this is defining something that has the bankrupt West. Keep in mind, the United States is not only morally bankrupt, and this is my own country. It makes me quite sad to watch this over a period of decades. But the oligarchs, the David Rockefellers, the George Soroses, the Warren Buffetts, the families with names no one's ever heard of, like Russell from Yale, they have made a silent coup d'etat, if you will. They own Congress of the United States. They own the presidents of the United States. Trump is a little bit of a wild cannon on the deck right now, but nobody knows if he's going to be serious or if he's going to whatever. And certainly Hillary Clinton is willing to make war on everybody as long as she can become president.
What is the solution for Turkey, especially? You can also talk about worldwide.
Yes, I think
How can CIA or what we say is oligarchs, New World Order,
deep state,
can we convince them not to touch about?
they're not nice guys. They're all about power and the abuse of power. And I think what Turkey has to do is define for Turkey and for Turkish interest of the Turkish people a long-term, clear strategy of development. And right now, I think that's in a thought process from every indication I've seen. It's not yet a clear strategy. And the one clear strategy that I have been documenting for years, I just came back from a tour of China, and I'm going to Russia in 2 weeks, is I call it the Eurasian century. The American century is bankrupt. It's going down like the British Empire did 100 years ago. And the Eurasian century is very different in terms of its basis from the American century. The American century was an oligarchic model, an empire model, masquerading in like a drag queen as democracy, spreading free enterprise, but that was American free enterprise, American corporations that benefited from that. And I think what Turkey, if I were, let's say, a think tank advising the president and the prime minister of Turkey, I would suggest doing a very fundamental examination of the potentials of the infrastructure integration that's taking place within the Shanghai Cooperation countries, the Eurasian countries. The Russian-Eurasian Economic Union with Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and so forth.
Shanghai Five.
The Shanghai Five. Well, now it has Pakistan, India, and Iran probably this coming year, or later this year. And these are open-ended projects. The Chinese are willing to work with any nation or any country that's clear and open about its desire to benefit from this, because it creates a flow of trade. And the flow of trade creates new markets. That's how markets are made. They're not made free out of the air like Milton Friedman or some of these American economists believe. They're created, they're man-made, and this is one of the most beautiful projects unfolding that I've ever witnessed in my life. So this is, I think, something I would suggest, were I in a position to do so, I would suggest that Turkey look at this very, very closely and engage in dialogue with Russia about this, with China about this, and other countries.